on the air. We are back with another week of podcasting excellence on the Nerdcast Empire. I am Matt in the studio. Great to have you along with us tonight on twitch.tv/Nerdcast Empire live for Music Weekly, and apparently also on YouTube at Nerdcast Empire on our YouTube page as well. So we appreciate those of you who might be tuning in on YouTube throughout the night as we test out this multi-streaming operation. Should be very interesting to see how this ends up working out and whether I can end up keeping it all straight at the end of the day. But we're excited for some great new music. We're going to be talking the music of January the 31st, and we've got another great week of music to tell you all about. And to help me do that, as always, joining me in studio is Mike. Mike, how's it going?
It's going. We're live, I think. Just jumped into the YouTube stream as well. It really felt like this week was the first week of the year as far as just what felt like a full slate of music for the new releases. I think we kind of struggled out of the gates in January with not that many options, but there was a lot to choose from, and I think we picked some good stuff.
Yeah, I think so. I think, there was a lot of variety this week. I think that was certainly very telling that I think there was a lot of different stuff going on, which is some of these weeks we haven't had like the wide range of stuff, or there just hasn't been a lot of music. But like you said, it really kind of felt like with this week, we really had the full slate of what we would expect. And from a quality standpoint, especially a week where you don't have any Frontiers bands, you always wonder, what's that going to look like? But I thought there was a lot of good stuff on the list. And of course, we'll post Mike's playlist when we get to the new music section of this podcast, and you'll be able to actually go in and see all of the new albums for this week and choose your own favorites from the week. So it should be really interesting to see what you decide is your favorite. But we've got a lot of stuff to talk about on this edition of the Nerdcast Empire that, again, we are co-streaming both on Twitch and on YouTube. We'll see how long that lasts, especially once we get to the music part in the second part of this show. We're going to get to some news headlines first, and it is that time of year again, folks. It is time to talk about the Hall of Fame nominees for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. This is always a controversial topic. It probably shouldn't be, but unfortunately, it is one of those things that because there are oftentimes so many questionable nominees that are put up for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, it becomes something that can be a little controversial. But in the article that I've posted on both chats on Blabbermouth, you have the list of nominees for this year. And just to run down them real quick, and then we can discuss. We have Bad Company, The Black Crowes, Mariah Carey, Chubby Checker, Joe Cocker, Billy Idol, Joy Division, New Order, Cyndi Lauper, Mana, Oasis, Outkast Fish, Soundgarden, and The White Stripes. That is the best of the best, if you will, on the list. I'm sure if Eddie Trunk hasn't already had a rant about it, I'm sure he will or has, and rightfully so. Eddie Trunk knows about rock and roll, but we do too a little bit. And you looked at this list. What jumps out at you?
You come back to it every year that at the end of the day, this is just a music hall of fame. There's nothing inherently rock and roll centric about it. It isn't confined to just music that you would label rock and roll. I think there are the ones that, and again, since they do have weird exclusions over the years, you think, why is this band not in, this band not in? It's weird congratulating those that are selected, but it certainly is always nice to be included in anything, I suppose, and this is no different. So to me, you kind of have the obvious ones, your Bad Company, Black Crowes, Billy Idol, Soundgarden. Those to me seem like no-brainers. They're the ones that I think are overrated, but they strike me as the bands and artists that are still rock, but I wouldn't include them personally because I'm not a big fan, and that would be like your Oasis, your Fish, and the White Stripes. The White Stripes kind of kills me more than any because I just don't know if they were around long enough to really feel like they need inclusion in the Hall of Fame. And then you have the ones that are obviously big acts that aren't rock, your Mariah Careys and your Outkast. Like, there's nothing inherently wrong with either of those, but I don't think of them as rock acts in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, it's interesting that I guess I just don't know. I mean, they've just based on who they've put in the Hall of Fame so far, they don't know where they draw the line on the rock and roll, and I think this list certainly confirms that. I'm a little surprised someone like Chubby Checker is not a member of the Hall of Fame already. That seems kind of odd. He's been around
Yeah.
forever.
What were we waiting on that one?
I don't know if I feel like he might have had some personal things that maybe for some reason maybe some of the older voters didn't put him in. I don't know, but yeah, I mean Bad Company makes a lot of sense. The Black Crows, I would think I know they were really appreciative of even just being nominated. Again, Joe Cocker, like you said, not exactly my favorite type of music, but the dude had a ton of hits. Billy Idol, I mean, just for his Christmas album alone, probably.
Dude's a legend.
Totally a legend. Cyndi Lauper, I that's where you kind of like is on her merits of work, like she's a Hall of Famer. Is it the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame? Is it the Pop Hall of Fame? There really isn't a Pop Hall of Fame, I guess. So that's where she jumps in.
I suppose there's not. I don't know.
There could be. It certainly doesn't get the attention that the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame gets for whatever reason. Oasis, like you said, I'm not necessarily a fan, but I would totally understand if they get in. And Soundgarden, to me, is a no-brainer when you talk about an era of music and you talk about a group that defined that era of music. I feel like they're a group that definitely should be at the forefront of those groups to get into the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Soundgarden, really one of the poster children of that grunge and alternative rock era, and Chris Cornell was one of the biggest vocalists of that period of time. I think beyond maybe Kurt Cobain, he's probably the most celebrated of the vocalists from that era, then followed by maybe Scott Weiland and Eddie Vedder, I imagine, as well. But yeah, I'm certainly not surprised to see Soundgarden, and I wonder when their first year of eligibility was, because when you compare them to some of the other acts, I don't know time-wise how that panned out, but again, it's hard to really be ultra critical of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame because you know what it is. Every year there are going to be the acts you're like, they're just now getting in. Why is that? There'll be the acts of, oh, they're eligible now and getting in. That's cool. And then there will be the acts of, why are they getting in? They aren't rock and roll. And we can have that discussion every year on end, and it doesn't really matter at the end of the day because that's what they've chosen their Hall of Fame to be, this kind of all-inclusive popular music Hall of Fame.
What's weird is that Soundgarden was on the ballot in 2023, evidently didn't make the cut in 2024, and now has come back in 2025, which doesn't make a lot of sense. To be eligible, you have to have band must have released its first commercial recording at least 25 years before the year of nomination. It's like Soundgarden originally started in 1984. That was when the band was formed. So, when you look at commercial releases and you go down to their discography, their first studio album was 1988. So is that when you start the clock on those guys? I'm not sure, but absolutely they should be in. Whether they'll get in, I mean, obviously they didn't get in 2 years ago. Probably should have then. So I think it's certainly very much up for debate. But
I feel like you could create a list of bands who still aren't in that would just demolish the list of this year's inductees, sadly.
Yeah, and maybe we'll do a little research on that because I'm sure when this list came out, there's probably another website somewhere that has compiled a list of worthy candidates for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame that aren't even on the ballot. So we'll see if we can find that. Maybe we'll bring that to everybody's attention next week on the Music Podcast. But we'll be finding out, I believe, in April who makes the cut and is in the 2025 class of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Moving on to another story, and we always like to talk about when we have some new news as far as box sets and things like that seem like they might be interesting. And this one I saw a week or so ago and figured we would bring it to the forefront. Jerry Dixon saying that Warrant is releasing or planning a box set featuring at least some previously unreleased material and new music. The article from Blabbermouth kind of talks about, that a lot of the stuff that was done by Janie Lane has been released. Like they're one of those bands that it's not like they have a ton of stuff laying around that wasn't put out, but there could be a few things, I guess, that maybe had just been sitting in demos or whatever it might be that they might be able to put together. So it does sound like Warrant is going to, be able to get enough together to be able to release something in a box set form. And we've talked about Warrant before on this podcast. One of those bands that is criminally
Yeah.
underrated as a rock and metal act, a band that was unfairly pigeonholed because of one song that they didn't even want to. If they didn't, even if you can say that okay, they did want to record it, they certainly didn't want it to be featured front and center the way it was. These guys are really awesome, and if people haven't dug into their catalog, they absolutely should. And I, for one, would be really excited about a Warrant box set.
Yeah, and talking about the article when they go into the interview, they kind of make it a point of saying that Janie Lane was the songwriter.
Yeah.
They wrote guitar parts, they had stuff kind of laid out, but when it came to the lyrics, it's like when they sat down to do the Cherry Pie album, it's like no one else wrote in Uncle Tom's Cabin. That was Janie Lane. No one else in the band was going to be able to write something to that degree. So, they mentioned in terms of not having stuff laying around. When he got involved and they recorded to release the stuff. They didn't just have it laying around sitting dormant. But yeah, he's just horribly underrated and underappreciated as a songwriter. Some of their not hit songs on their first couple albums are just tremendous. They do kind of talk about there might be some footage that they might be able to release as far as like a DVD maybe.
Yeah.
And they kind of go into the part that I thought was also kind of interesting is that they mentioned some of this material, that they could just dump it all on social media and give people the access to it for free, but it's like that's kind of their legacy at this point. Like they would rather take it, compile it, and release it in some sort of box set form, some sort of collector's item for the fans, and the fans would ultimately appreciate that more than just having it thrown on Facebook or Instagram. And I think it takes us kind of the topic we talk about a lot, and that's how bands can kind of monetize themselves in the modern landscape. And when you have these legacy bands that have been around 40 years, that's an asset. They have stuff laying around that if you started a band today, you just don't have that. You can't get on Bandcamp and say, well, I have my 40-year retrospective here, deluxe box set, 8 LPs, giant art book, whatever. I mean, these bands, and we see a lot of the box sets lately with 30th, 40th anniversary of their classic albums, their full discography. I mean, that's just another thing they can do to give something of value to the fans who are most likely more the physical collector type anyway, but it just gives them another way to monetize their efforts over the years. And I think it's cool when you hear more about bands doing that. Like, it's what they have to do.
Yeah, and I think, like you said, the fans are going to appreciate that. And I think everybody should, if you have a band like that you really like, maybe it's not Warrant, maybe it's somebody else, when they release these sets, if you have the means to do so, try to pick them up because, one, you're still supporting bands that, probably aren't making a ton of money off of touring. They're probably, if they're releasing new music, it's probably not commercially successful. It's probably just them continuing to do what they love to do.
Yeah.
And it's a chance to kind of continue to support this band probably the best way you can. And the other thing, too, is if these sets sell well, you're going to get more bands that will do more of these sets. But if record labels kind of take a chance on bands and they do these big releases, these collections, and they don't sell well, it's less likely that they're going to do that for another band. So maybe you're not a fan of Warrant, but maybe you're a fan of a contemporary of theirs who you would like to see them get the box set treatment somewhere down the line. Think about, supporting the Warrant release because that's going to show the record label, hey, I'm a fan of music from that era, and I want you to release as much of it physically and give me all the collector's items you can so that I can have something to kind of remember one of my favorite bands of the late 80s and early 90s.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, once they're gone, they're gone. Enjoy it while it's out there. And if they have this material in whatever form it is that they can put into some sort of really nice package to sell, yeah, I mean, I think the collector, diehard, loyal fans over the years, they're going to eat that stuff up.
For sure. We'll let you know. There's no release dates on anything. I think they're kind of still in the early stages of putting this together. So once we get more details on when this is coming out, what it might include, what the price tag is going to look like, we'll definitely pass it along on the podcast. Getting to our final news item of the day, we're going to just be talking about a good cause for really what has been a really tough situation. So we definitely wanted to share this. Of course, everybody's well aware of the wildfires they've had out in California. It's been devastating. to that area, and many rock and roll bands and individuals are going to get together to do a benefit concert for the victims of the wildfires. It'll be held on February the 27th at the Battleship Iowa Museum in San Pedro, California. I believe if you go to the website, you can actually, if you are a first responder out in California, you can actually get tickets for free as long as you put in for them by this Friday, February the 21st. And you look at the list, it's going to be Sammy Hagar, Robin Zander, Glenn Hughes, Kevin Cronin, Steve Stevens, Ornathi,
Orianthe.
okay. Matt Sorum, Carmine Rojas, Brent Woods, and Paul Trudeau, among others, probably, that will be appearing at this. And certainly it's great that that they're getting together to do something like this and try to raise money for those who are struggling to overcome what has been a really devastating natural disaster out in California.
Yeah, absolute great idea. A who's who of just classic rock all stars, basically. I was kind of doing some research. I wasn't really familiar with Kings of Chaos as an entity. That they were basically a supergroup started kind of with Matt Sorum, Duff McKagan, and Gilby Clarke, and then kind of revolving members around, people like Corey Taylor, Robert DeLeo, Sebastian Bach, Slash, Nuno Bettencourt, Ed Roland, Steven Tyler, just a crap ton of musicians have at one point in time kind of joined up and played with them. So that's really awesome. And again, you can't have much a better cause than this. So it's definitely something that I would like to see. Maybe they release something tangible that you can buy that might be able to benefit the relief effort there as well. I think that would be really cool.
Yeah, it'd be really neat to see a DVD, Blu-ray release of this concert that would also benefit those who are struggling as well. So, and kudos to the first responders. We talk about it all the time when there's a disaster, whether it's in the wildfires or we had the hurricane down in the southeast last year that caused so much damage and devastation. And these people just dive right into there with no thought of their own life and to try to help and save people and save property and try to do what they can to get people back on their feet. So always happy to see those people be rewarded in some way and get a chance to thank them for a thankless job.
Yeah.
What they do is certainly desperately needed. And certainly we send out our thoughts and prayers to everyone out there. And certainly hopefully as the weather maybe begins to change for the spring, things will get a little easier to deal with out there. But again, that concert coming up February the 27th, and you can go to that article listed in the chat for more details if you happen to be out in California and would like to attend or even donate to the cause. I'm sure you can do that as well. That wraps up our news segment for today. Just a reminder, check out our website, nerdcastempire.com. We've got past episodes of the Nerdcast Empire, all of our social media. We have a store involved with our website. We've got all kinds of really cool stuff, so check it out at nerdcastempire.com. Reminder, we got news coming your way. Our news podcast all at 8:30 a.m. Eastern time now, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, just to make it nice and consistent for you to check us out. And we'll be back in less than 13 and a half hours. We'll be back with the Nerdcast News Report tomorrow, Monday, 8:30 a.m. Eastern time. We've got a few news items, including a quick recap of the NXT Premium Live event yesterday, which was a lot of fun. A couple other news stories as well to get you started through your week. Join us tomorrow morning, 8:30 a.m. for the Nerdcast News Report. So it's time to get to our new music segment. We're going to hope that this survives on YouTube. I am not 100% sure yet how this is going to work out. We'll figure that out as we go. Of course, each and every week, Mike will go through and we'll pull a song from each of the new album releases for a given week. This week, it is the week of January the 31st, and I will be pasting the playlist that he creates into the chat in both chats, and you can go to that playlist and basically check out everything, the good, the bad, the ugly, if you will, of the new music releases. We then go through there. We each pick 2 new albums that we want to spotlight for this podcast, and we play it for you. As always, if you're listening on your favorite podcast network, which, of course, you can find us Apple, Spotify, all that good stuff, we will not have the music clips in there. You'll have to catch us live. That's the best place right now. Guaranteed to be live on twitch.tv/Nerdcast Empire. Also hoping to continue to stream at our YouTube page at Nerdcast Empire. But it's time to get to the new music, some good stuff this week, I think, and a little bit of variety of our 4 picks. But excited to get a chance to talk about these 4 bands. And Mike, we'll let you kick it off. What do you have for us first?
Yeah, so getting us started off, I am going with the 5th full-length album from the Barcelona, Spain-based melodic metal band. The band is called Kilmara, and their newest album is Journey to the Sun.
Yeah, like I said, there was a lot of stuff this week that I really wanted to get back to and listen to the whole album. And both of your picks, that was the case for me. And the track that was on the playlist from these guys, I really thought was good.
Yeah, when I pulled this song for the playlist and gave it a watch, I just kind of immediately was like, okay, this is probably right up my alley. And as I listened to more of the album, that was definitely the case. If you look at the cover art to the album, there's an arcade machine. There appears to be some like homages to classic '80s like sci-fi movies, like the little fighter jet looks like something from Star Wars. It's just everything that visually I want to see in an album cover. So I knew I was probably in for something pretty cool. Like I mentioned, it's their 5th full-length album. The band formed in 2003 as Kilmara after being around for a few years under a different name. They currently consist of John Portillo on guitars, Carlos Salce on guitars, Danny Ponce on vocals, Eric Martinez Balanza on drums, and Didac Pla on bass. Reading some of the reviews to this and kind of gathering my own thoughts on it too, I feel like there's a decent overlap, if I had to guess, of fans of power metal, video games, and kind of an appreciation for pop culture in the 80s. And I think if you fit into that category where you enjoy all of that, there's going to be a lot here for you to like in both the sound and imagery of the band. If you're into power metal, I think you'll still like it. I think it's not disqualifying to not be into the other things, but looking at some of the reviews, one of them from Metal Addicts, that was definitely kind of a turnoff for that reviewer because both the first track and the last track kind of lean into what sounds like video game sounds.
Mm-hmm.
The last song on the album is basically an 8-bit version of one of the songs. So, if that's your thing, that's awesome. I think it's fine. I have no problem with that. Angry Metal Guy compares these guys to bands like Fellowship and Evershine. I was a real big fan of Fellowship's album they had last year, so not surprising. I enjoy this as well. If you go into Raining Phoenix Music's website, their record label, they mention in their bio they have influences such as Megadeth, Gamma Ray, Helloween, Iron Maiden, Rage, Manowar, Dream Theater. And yeah, that there's probably a little bit of that in their sound if you really dissect it. And those are all bands I like, so I enjoy this stuff. Yeah, standout tracks on the album include Alliance of the Free, Chances, Wildfire, and Even Hole, and the track that I picked to listen to, the title track, Journey to the Sun.
Let's check these guys out. This is Kilmara. The album is Journey to the Sun. This is track number 2 on this album. It is the title track, Journey to the Sun. Let's listen to a little bit of this now.
Brace for departure is nigh. Although we are a glimpse in time, let's make it worth a blissful life. And on our journey to the sun, beyond the gates of gold, eternal we will fly. Desperate at times when we commit to the error of supposing we're the center divine. Days will get.
But yeah, they've got a great sound, like you said. I think, the combination of things that they're clearly into based on this album it makes it a logical pick for either of us, honestly, on this podcast. But I think anytime you can combine this type of music with video games, I think it's going to be a real win and something that's going to appeal to people certainly of our age, I think. But no, I really, like I said, the track that was on the playlist, I really dug that, and I'm looking forward to going back this week and getting a chance to listen to this one front to back because I thought it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, definitely worth checking out in its entirety.
Yep, that is Kilmara and Journey to the Sun, the first pick of this week. As always, Mike has 2 picks, so tell us about pick number 2.
Yeah, so pick number 2, as I went through the list of what I had initially deemed as bands that warranted further inspection, this was obviously one of them, but there was so much out there that that I liked, but I couldn't quite fully endorse. There was something that maybe kept it from getting over the top. And when I listened to this album, I was just like, okay, I found my next pick because there's absolutely nothing wrong with this album. It maybe isn't something that I immediately think of as being in my wheelhouse, but man, it's so enjoyable to listen to. That album in question is the most recent offering from the Italian post-grunge stoner rock band, which we'll talk about the tags in a moment. The band is Plasticdrop, and the album is Life, Death, and Miracles.
Yeah, see, when you tell me those tags, like that certainly gives me a little pause.
Yeah.
When you have the combination of those two, if it's one or the other, oftentimes it's like, okay, that's fine. But like I said, I listened to the track of this off the playlist, and I thought it was really good. So there must be something about those tags that still makes this work out pretty well.
Yeah, I think in a lot of cases when you talk about the Bandcamp tags, you're just trying to pull in as many people as you can. So I think you cast a wide net. The other tags they have listed are hard rock, rock, post rock. So you have a nice combination there. The band themselves, they formed in 2015. They released their first EP in 2019. It's kind of a power trio. You got Paolo Pani on guitars and vocals, Martina Manca on bass, and Alessandro Brundu on drums. Definitely got a really big sound for three people. I definitely dig it. Going back to the tags, though, I think when you label or apply a label to yourself of post-grunge, I think you can sometimes maybe unfairly give people the idea that you're kind of that mid-late 90s, maybe derivative. We're trying to recapture that spirit of grunge music. We're trying to sound like Creed or Nickelback because that was kind of the way that you harnessed the energy of your Nirvanas and your Pearl Jams back in the day. But I don't get any of that here. I think also with the post-rock label, you kind of go the other direction where when you start talking about being post-rock, you run the risk of your music being too far out in left field, like where it's just, this isn't even music anymore. I don't know what you guys are doing. But no, I don't think that's the case with these guys at all. To me, these guys are just a straight up hard rock band. I think they would have fit really well within the first iteration of grunge music and post grunge and beyond post grunge. I think that they're a band that doesn't necessarily adhere to any one subgenre, but they fit in everywhere, kind of like a Danko Jones in like the 2010s, or like a Soul Asylum, where it's like, yeah, they kind of fit in. They were kind of an alternative rock band, but they just played good rock music.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of what you have here. I know I typically am more of like the traditional heavy metal, power metal, or melodic death metal guy lately, but sometimes you just hear a really solid, straight-up rock band, and you can't help but keep listening. The album is fairly short, really digestible, and I think given the amount of plays that I currently see on YouTube, I really want to see these guys take off because, man, it's just a really good album. Standout tracks to me, honestly, listen to the whole thing, but standout tracks to me are Life, I Want You to Hear Me, Nothing to Share, Don't Leave Me Now, It Turns to Bad, and the track that I picked out to listen to, Death Not For You.
Let's check these guys out. Plasticdrop. The album is Life, Death, and Miracles. This is the third track off of that album, Death Not For You. Let's check out a little bit of that song now. When I listened to that track, like because you were talking about kind of post grunge, like there is maybe a hint of like a Foo Fighters type of sound there. I think rather than the post grunge, it kind of became nu metal. This does feel like the other branch of that tree where it was post grunge, it became mainstream rock.
Yeah.
Like I think you can go two different directions with that, and so many of those groups that we talk about a lot are the nu metal, branch of that tree, and sometimes that is not always enjoyable to listen to, but I think they've gone the other way where it is like, this is music that you could hear on the radio type of rock. So like you said, straightforward hard rock, and I think that's what they've really nailed with this sound.
I really like that you kept it going long enough to get that little like bass lick there at the end. That sounded really good. But yeah, I think that's the trouble when you start applying post tagging to a sound. Is it's almost like the hair metal of our times. It doesn't actually describe a sound. It's almost like they're just kind of like that. They just do that. But no, I think these guys just, as far as just straight up rocking, it could fit in any era and not be out of place. But I definitely think people need to check these guys out.
Yeah, for sure. Should have way more plays on YouTube Music, so definitely check those guys out. I thought that was really good. Excited to go back and listen to the whole album. And Mike said it's not very long, 32 minutes, so you can get through the whole thing pretty quickly. It's Plasticdrop. Definitely check out their new release this week. I've got 2 picks as well this week, and we are going to get things started with pick number 1, and it is the Finnish heavy metal band from Tampere, Finland. It is Neverfade with the album Thieves in the Night. This band was founded in 2022. This is their first full-length album. They've had several singles leading up to this, but this is the first full release. This group made up of vocalist Lassie Landström, guitarist Juri Salonen, guitarist Jesse Luukkonen, bassist Jesse Kamarainen, and drummer Juho Savikurki. So very Finnish, and apologize in advance for those name pronunciations. They consider themselves a standard bearer of what they call the new wave of Finnish heavy metal.
There we go.
And you'll definitely hear some influences. The website Toxic Metal Zine lists the band's inspirations as Judas Priest, Ambush, Nightwish, and Blind Guardian. So definitely a variety of sound there, but a lot of good stuff to draw from. Has a melodic sound, maybe a little more so than your typical like new wave of British heavy metal, but there's definitely an influence from that new wave of British heavy metal sound. Guitars sound great. Bass and drums are there to really kind of bring in the bottom part of it. And then Landström's vocals are exactly what you would expect out of a band that's certainly influenced by that new wave of British heavy metal. But this is a really enjoyable listen all the way through. Standout tracks include The Blade Part 1, The Blade Part 2, Hourglass Breaking, and the song we're going to listen to on the podcast, Phantoms in the Wind. So let's check these guys out now. This is Neverfade with Thieves in the Night. This is the 3rd track off of that album, Phantoms in the Wind. Let's listen to a little bit of that now.
Be awake beyond your God and always be aware. Disappear like a creature in the night, hiding in the shadows out of sight. Always in hiding, always the enemy closing in. Must keep on running in the dark, never let them run. Never stop fighting, always the enemy closing in. Must keep on running, we are becoming the phantoms in the wind.
But yeah, you can definitely, like I said, hear the new wave of British heavy metal influence, but also I think a little more melody, a little more on the melodic rock side as well. So I think a good balance between those two. But I really dug this album. Mike, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, it was one that pretty early on when I was going through the playlist, I was like, yeah, these guys are probably going to be up my alley as well. I need to listen to the whole thing still because I don't hear a lot of Nightwish there, not necessarily yet, or Blind Guardian, but I imagine maybe if I listen to the whole thing, I'll get a little more of that more kind of grandiose sound that I attribute to those bands. The album artwork's pretty wild. It looks like it could exist in the same universe as the Ironbound CD from last year with like the crazy looking kind of like vaporwave style and whatnot. I really dig that, but yeah, it's good stuff. Another quality album this week.
Yeah, those last two on the they could very well be influenced by those two bands. I don't know how much of those two bands I heard in this album, but to me it was very like if you tell me they were influenced by Judas Priest pretty heavily, I could definitely hear that from this album. It has that more of a vibe to it, but really enjoyable. Definitely check those guys out. Neverfade. with their new release this week. As always, I have 2 picks, and this second one's really a fun one. I really enjoyed this second album, and this is a band that has been around a little while. This is a Swedish rock band formed in Helsingborg in 2007. This is the Night Flight Orchestra with Give Us the Moon. This band was originally formed in 2007 by Bjorn Strid and David Anderson when they were touring in the U.S. with their band at the time, Soilwork. They were later joined by bassist Charlie D'Angelo, who's from Arch Enemy, Spiritual Beggars, and Ex Merciful Fate. Richard Larson from Von Benzo, Jonas Karlsbach from Mean Streak, and more recently Sebastian Forsland from Cadwatha. So definitely pulling a lot of different influences from a lot of places. This is their 7th studio album. This is just, I mean, as much as the last one had a little bit more of a new wave of British heavy metal feel to it, this is just straight up classic rock, AOR rock. This has a little bit of everything. You've got some ballads, you've got just straight rock and roll, even a little bit of funk rock on there, and I'm certainly a big fan of bands that can work a little funk into their rock. There's definitely some synth sounds. You're going to hear them very heavily when we get to our sample track that take you back to the 1980s in a heavy way. Some spoken word parts that kind of tie the story of the whole album together. This was just a lot of fun to listen to. It's really polished. You can tell these guys have been around a while and clearly have mastered this whole thing of putting out albums, because this is really, really good stuff. Standout tracks include Melbourne May I, Paloma, Give Us the Moon, and the track we're going to listen to on the podcast is Shooting Velvet. So let's check these guys out. This is the Night Flight Orchestra, their 7th release, Give Us the Moon. This is the 3rd track off of that release, Shooting Velvet. Let's listen to a little bit of that now.
Can you feel it? That used to be us, singing all our dreams once lost. We were underneath the stars. Well, I believe that we're still young, shooting velvet from a gun. There will always be a time for us together. I believe we're on the run, and we know we must be done. We will fight until we're back and let it last forever. And come on down.
Yeah, Angry Metal Guy had a review of this, and this is a band that he really, really likes and was like super pumped up that he got a new release from these guys, and definitely enjoyed it quite a bit. And like I said, this is one of those groups that I'd like to go back and check out some of their earlier releases, because this was just a lot of fun and was a really easy listen. The Night Flight Orchestra. Mike, your thoughts on these guys?
Yeah, every so often we run into a band that has stuff out there that for some reason has just flown under the radar and we've not been aware of them. And I think that's definitely the case with these guys. I mean, they have just a tremendous sound. I just immediately want to go and listen to this whole thing now and absorb all of it. It's kind of interesting to think these guys are connected to Soilwork. I wouldn't have guessed that necessarily, but yeah, that's just a really cool sound and kind of like on point for this week, because I feel like this week we had a lot of like kind of retro and early prog kind of sounds, and I feel like this kind of took all of that and like mashed it up into one like ultra melodic package. But yeah, that I really liked that.
Yeah, definitely fun. Certainly one of my favorite releases already of this early year, just again because it is so all over the place, but so well done. I definitely encourage you to check out the Night Flight Orchestra and their new release coming out on January the 31st. That's going to wrap up our new releases for this week. It's time to get to the vault, where Mike and I will give you classic albums you need to check out. And Mike is almost through his latest gimmick on the vault. He has basically gone through the Wikipedia list of all the glam bands, starting from the letter A through the letter Z, picking one band for each letter of the alphabet. And as he's gotten to the end, his choices have gotten much more limited. And this week was no exception. You were on to the letter Y, and it turns out that didn't give you a whole lot of room for choices this week, did it?
Yeah, as it turns out, both the letters Y and Z are extremely limited, so not much of a surprise as to where I'm going for this week and next week. So I guess without any drama, with no other options available, I went with the band Y&T, Shocker.
Good choice.
Yeah, like that's pretty wild that I was able to narrow it down from the one that I had to this. And yeah, this is a band that I know had been around a really long time. I really wasn't. My first interaction with them was from an old compilation CD I bought like in the late '90s, called "Heavy Metal Hits of the '80s," and it had the song "Summertime Girls" on it. So when people would mention Y&T, that's immediate what I would think of. I would think of that song, not quite realizing at the time that the album that it came off of was kind of considered them kind of dumbing down their sound and going for a lighter sound to attract more of kind of the hair metal attention that was popular in the mid '80s. But all that being said, it's the album from which that song originated that I'm choosing for my vault pick this week. It is 1985's "Down for the Count."
Yeah, I'm excited to go back, and usually I get a chance to listen to the vault pick beforehand. I didn't today, but I'm excited to listen to this because obviously I know their hit too. It's everywhere on whether it's hair metal or radio on Sirius XM or whatever it may be. But I have a feeling there's a little more substance to these guys than that one hit song, which was an excellent song.
Yeah, I mean, as far as like hair metal anthems go, it's right up there.
Yeah.
It's tremendous for what it's trying to do, and I think that's important to respect that it had a mission and it achieved that mission. And yet years later, I started getting a little more familiar with some of their stuff. Like, I didn't know the song "Mean Streak" until well after I'd heard "Summertime Girls," but that's certainly one of their probably more well thought of songs as far as critically goes. But anyway, back to "Down for the Count." It was the 7th studio album by the American hard rock band, released on November 9th, 1985. According to Wikipedia, like I mentioned, this album marked a shift to a lighter sound for the band to fit in better with the hair metal scene that was kicking at that point in time. Listening to this and reading reviews and the Wikipedia entries just makes me realize that I need to get into this band more and kind of dig more into what they've done, because it's clear that this band is hugely influential, and Dave Meniketti himself as a guitarist and singer, super influential on the scene. He's got a tremendous voice, and honestly, the guitar tone in some of the songs on this album really stood out to me as being really cool. A song like "Anytime at All," just the guitar work, whatever he's doing to get that sound, it could just be normal overdrive, but it really stands out to you. The album itself might be more in line with the hair metal sound, but Y&T certainly isn't the first or the only band to tweak their sound over the years. You think of like Alice Cooper and Ozzy Osbourne, they reinvented themselves numerous times over the decades, and no one seemed to really mind all that much. They still created good songs, whether it was them or people they had writing songs for them. They were still hits, they were classic, and this is kind of the same thing. I really enjoyed this album despite it potentially being not one of their better ones. The only kind of negative I give this album is I don't understand why multiple bands over the years have covered the song "Your Mama Don't Dance." I'm not a big Loggins and Messina fan. I'm sure they had way better songs than that one, but that one seems to show up every now and then. I think Y&T's cover of it is probably better than Poison's, but still
Probably.
still I don't know if it's really all that necessary. Sadly, Meniketti is the only surviving classic member of the band, but they still continue to tour with Meniketti at the helm. It's always good to hear with bands whose go back as far as the early '70s. If you still have anyone left and they're still out there touring regularly, that's always a good thing. Standout tracks on the album include "In the Name of Rock," "Anytime at All," "Face Like an Angel," "Summertime Girls," "It Looks Like Trouble," and "Hands of Time." If this is their kind of dumbed down effort, I can't wait to hear the rest of their music.
Yeah, there are so many of these groups that you've spotlighted over the past 25 weeks where we've gone through and yeah, you might be familiar with one song or maybe one album, and then you go to find out they have this really great catalog of music that unfortunately, for whatever reason, just never got the spotlight it deserved. And I have a feeling as we dig into Y&T, it's going to be very much the same thing, that they're going to be much more than, that one song. Now, I will say they probably were more fortunate than a lot of other bands of this era that their one song is excellent. Like, it wasn't a sellout song. It wasn't something that the band's like, I mean, we were just talking about Warrant earlier and Cherry Pie
Yeah.
and how they despise the song. And, you know, these guys had a hit that I think any band would be happy to sing and proud of that result. Like, yeah, I'm sure there's consternation when you're like, hey, we have other stuff that we really like better, or we think was more actually reflective of us as a band, and this was the hit. So there's always going to
Yeah.
be those feelings, but Summertime Girls is a great song, and I think it holds up, even to this day as just great music. And yeah, I'm really interested in kind of digging into these guys a little farther and getting to listen to more of their albums and kind of get a grasp of what that sound was kind of maybe before the big hair band hit that Summertime Girls was.
That's the thing, though, where these guys are fortunate, too, is that with a band like Warrant, Cherry Pie was their second album. They don't have a classic era to fall back on. To me,
Correct.
Y&T is more like a band like Yes, where they had the songs that everyone loved, like the heavy prog stuff. Then, as times change and the sound shifts, they release Owner of a Lonely Heart.
Right.
Still a great song. Now, that's probably more of a divergence than what I'm guessing the Y&T sound on Down for the Count is compared to their older stuff. But you can kind of make that comparison where it's
Yeah.
clearly you guys kind of went a different direction. Maybe not as dramatic as Yes, of course, or Genesis or any of those bands. But yeah, I'm anxious to hear more because I think Dave Menichetti's a great singer, great guitarist, and I'm sure, considering how well thought of he and the band is, it's going to be worth checking out the rest of their catalog.
Yeah, absolutely. But definitely check this one out. Down for the Count, the seventh studio album from Y&T from 1985. If you've listened to Summertime Girls, go back and listen to the whole album. Otherwise, I'm definitely interested in checking out more of their stuff as we go forward. My gimmick is continuing on, and thankfully, we ended up finding another year that was somewhat decent as far as music. We have been going year by year from 1969 to now currently 2016 and picking out an album or a couple of albums that were influential or just ones that I liked from that year. And we'll get some honorable mentions, and I know Mike will have some comments on some of these, so we'll double back when I finish up because some of these are certainly some big albums. But other albums that were honorable mentions for me in 2016, Metallica's Hardwired to Self-Destruct came out. I thought this was really good, a really good way for them to kind of get back to what I would consider to be the best of their modern style. Really good stuff on this album, Hardwired, Moth into Flame, Now That We're Dead, Spit Out the Bone, among others. I had to throw this in there because usually I skip over the greatest hits stuff, but I just saw this one. I should buy this album. It's the singles from Phil Collins, came out October 14th, 2016.
Yeah, I'm sure that's great.
And man, you just go down this list and it's immediately you're starting out with Easy Lover with Phil Bailey. I mean, that's one of his absolutely best songs. Two Hearts, Susudio, I Missed Again, Wear My Hat, Don't Lose My Number, Can't Hurry Love, Something Happened on the Way to Heaven. There's 17 tracks on side one, or disc one, disc two, In the Air Tonight, Against All Odds, One More Night, A Groovy Kind of Love, True Colors, You'll Be in My Heart, Another Day in Paradise, which is a great song, and Take Me Home. And then there's another deluxe edition as well that has 3 discs. I love Phil Collins. I love his solo stuff. We just talked about Genesis earlier. Obviously, he has amazing stuff with Genesis as well, but definitely worth a mention. I saw the Sabaton release The Last Stand. Yeah, Sabaton's one of those bands that I would say walks the line between absurd and hard rock and absurd hard rock. But I do appreciate them. It was worth mentioning just because there's just so much history in these songs. Things like the song "The Lost Battalion" from World War I, and the Battle of Rorke's Drift, and every song on this album has some sort of historical theme to it. And I just think that's kind of cool. Their sound it just depends on how far over the top you're willing to enjoy that type of music, whether you're going to enjoy Sabaton or not. You mentioned Ghost Lights last week, so I just wanted to at least throw it out there because while I was sitting at NKU this week, I listened to Ghost Lights.
Great album.
And it was amazing. But I didn't want to pick it because I felt that was kind of cheating because I know you're going to spotlight it in a moment. But really, really great stuff from Advantageous. I'm trying to get back and kind of catch up on those guys. Dystopia from Megadeth came out in 2016 as well. Let Mike make some comments on that. But overall, still some good stuff on this album as well. One we did talk about last week, an EP from Ghost came out in 2016. The only single on it, the only non-cover track on it is Square Hammer. It's an amazing song. If I would have to think you've probably heard of it, you probably know it. If you don't, you should check it out. It's really, really great stuff. That's definitely worthy of a mention. We're going back to the Sonata Arctica well again because this is another album of theirs that is heavy rotation on my iPod. So gonna mention the Ninth Hour as our vault pick, or my vault pick for this week. This is definitely not your early Sonata Arctica. So if that's the stuff you're the most familiar with or you're a biggest fan of, your mileage may vary on this. But I do think there's a lot of really good writing and storytelling in this album. I think what they do really well. But it's just not the early stuff. It is definitely slower. It's definitely, there's more ballady type stuff on this album, which I really enjoy. But there's also some good rock songs. I think Life's a really good track. Closer to an Animal's not bad. Fairy Tale. We Are What We Are. Among the Shooting Stars, kind of slower. Fly, Navigate, Communicate. Candle Lawns. White Pearl, Black Oceans Part 2. And then finishing up with On the Fault Line. I like this album, but I know there are probably people who are critical of this album. But I think if you've gone through the whole collection of Sonata Arctica and you're still here at this point, I think you're going to find something you're going to really enjoy on this. But let's start with that one, and then we'll double back to the other ones I mentioned, and then we'll get to the ones I missed. So start out with Sonata Arctica.
Yeah, I think the album itself is fine. I think if you were to rank all of the Sonata Arctica albums, it probably lands somewhere near the bottom, but that's not to say it's not good still.
It's different.
Yeah, it is definitely a different vibe. I enjoy it. It's not one that I revisit a whole lot, but yeah, like Life, Fairy Tale, Callisto and Animal, really good. Till Death's Done Us Apart, it's a good song. If you like Sonata Arctica, there's still enough there to enjoy because it's ultimately still them. It's still Tony Kakko's voice. It's still it's more grounded power metal, but kind of still has a little bit of that feel to it.
Yeah.
It's not Silence, but it's still Sonata Arctica.
For sure. Like I said, I like it, but I can see where there would be people who maybe wouldn't dig it as much. Of the other albums I mentioned, I know you want to spotlight a few of those. What do you got there?
Yeah, a band that I didn't really know about until this album that came out in 2016. Avatar released Feathers and Flesh. Kind of just a different sounding metal band. Definitely check out tracks House of Eternal Hunt, The Eagle Has Landed, both really good. Avenged Sevenfold came back with The Stage in 2016 after the previous album. This was different for sure, and I think that's kind of what Avenged Sevenfold's been ever since, is just kind of a different thing each time around. We're never getting another City of Evil, unfortunately, but this album was still fine. You had tracks like The Stage, Paradigm, Creating God. Another kind of off-the-wall one, and this was the album that got me into this band. I wasn't really familiar with them until this, and that was Metal Resistance by Baby Metal.
Yeah.
To me, like some of their best work, you have Road to Resistance, Karate, Amore, Metataro. If you like kawaii metal, then by all means, you'll enjoy it. Delane released their EP Lunar Prelude in 2016. This was kind of when I first started finding out about Delane and getting into their music. It's a short EP, but still really cool. Tracks like Sucker Punch, Turn the Lights Out, and the new version of Don't Let Go. Just good, symphonic metal, enjoyable stuff. You mentioned Pope Star, obviously. Square Hammer, great song. Jorn Land released his Heavy Rock Radio compilation in 2016. I would love to, at some point in time, just compile all of the metal vocalists or bands cover albums and try to come up with who has the best track listing. I think he's probably one of the top contenders with what you have on this album.
That's a great album.
You know, tracks like Running Up That Hill, Rev on the Red Line, You're the Voice, Don't Stop Believing, Killer Queen, Hotel California, Rainbow in the Dark, The Final Frontier. There's a lot to love about this album. He's a tremendous singer, and it's definitely worth a listen by anyone who likes anything. Moving on, we have Megadeth's Dystopia, which you mentioned. Probably one of the best modern Megadeth albums, I think. The title track Dystopia is tremendous. Other tracks like The Threat Is Real, Fatal Illusion, Poisonous Shadows, Look Who's Talking, The Emperor. I don't... They're like Sonata Arctica. I don't dislike any of their work, but I think this at times feels like the most complete effort in the past probably 15, 20 years out of the band. It's just a really cool album. Kind of on the side, if you like video games with your metal or rock, we got the Megas releasing the Belmonts EP, which you could buy on their Bandcamp when it first came out, but when you bought it, they sent you a cassette of it. You got the digital copy, obviously, but then the only physical copy they sold was the cassette. So somewhere around here, I have the Megas Belmonts cassette, which is just a 3-track EP with them covering music from the Castlevania series, another game series that has great music, so that's really cool.
Well, since cassettes are making a comeback, they were just clearly ahead of their time.
Absolutely. This was 2016. They were several years ahead of things. And finally, you mentioned Metallica's Hardwired to Self-Destruct. Yeah, I almost forgot how much I enjoyed this album. I think when I think of Metallica post Saint Anger, I always think of Death Magnetic, and that's kind of where it ends. But this was a really good release, too. Atlas Rise, Hardwired, Now That We're Dead, Moth into Flame, Confusion, Here Comes Revenge. Also worth noting, a few years back, WWE used the song off this album, Now That We're Dead, in an Undertaker tribute package. I think it was probably leading up to the Boneyard match he had with AJ Styles, if I remember correctly. But you can find that on YouTube. That's like a really cool video, and cool that they used just kind of a Metallica song that wasn't necessarily a huge hit like 4 years after that album came out. You can definitely tell someone, likely Triple H, is keenly aware of the non-commercial hit Metallica songs in the modern era.
I just imagine him sitting around that giant office listening to Metallica and, you know, just all these metal bands all day long. But, of course, they had another... Was it that song that was used at the beginning of the match, or there was another Metallica song? Was it...
I have to go back and watch now. I think they used an older song at one point, too. But now I got to go back and watch it.
Yeah, I can't remember, because I feel like it was one of those things, like it was on the live feed, but then they originally like took it out of like the YouTube version, but I think maybe they put it back in at some point. But
it might have been that one too.
It might have been. I can't remember. But
again, because it's obviously been 5 years. But
I know it's controversial. I still think the Boneyard match is the Undertaker's best WrestleMania match ever.
It was the smartest one ever.
It was. It was just like everything about it was just, for everything they had to do, it was so brilliantly done. And it's one that I think will last forever.
I just wonder why we haven't now gone back and made, kind of like they did with Kane and See No Evil or whatever, why haven't we made The Undertaker a horror movie villain at some point? Like, and not even like, I mean, he was in Suburban Commando, which is the greatest movie of all time. But beyond that, and not even like Dead Man Undertaker. I want just kind of like crotchety old man Undertaker as a movie villain. I think we could pull that off.
I feel like he's too much of a redneck now. Like now,
instead of that's why it works.
I mean, I feel like some sort of show with him and Stone Cold like driving around, and I feel like that's a.
I feel like they would be good judges on like barbecue pit masters.
Yes, that would be perfect.
I think I want to see that.
The Undertaker, of course, involved in the LFG that's going to be airing tonight on A&E. So if you're wanting a little bit of Undertaker in your life, you can check that out. And great stuff for sure. Metal music and pro wrestling go hand in hand. I think that's why it works so well.
And video games and you name it. I got it. 80s pop culture.
That's right. A lot of 80s stuff this week as well. So, but that's going to wrap things up for this edition of the Nerdcast Empire. Of course, live on Twitch as we are every Sunday night, but this time also live on YouTube, and we'll see how that all worked out. Rachel was over there kind of monitoring things to make sure everything seemed to go pretty smoothly there. So if it's something that works out, we'll try to co-stream them. As long as YouTube doesn't drop the hammer on us at any point, we'll continue to do that. A reminder, we'll be back coming up at 8:30 a.m., so 12 and a half hours from now. We'll be back with the Nerdcast News Report. We'll get your week started with all the nerdy news you need to know. That'll be coming up Monday morning, 8:30 a.m. Eastern Time on the Nerdcast Empire. Big thanks to Stove Lake Media for their continued support of our podcast. Big thanks to Rachel for holding down the chat on the YouTube side tonight. Big thanks to everyone who's tuned in, no matter where you're listening to us, whether you're live or on the VOD. Big thanks to Mike for putting all this together each and every week, and a big thanks to you for listening to it. We'll be back with you again in about 12 and a half hours' time for another edition of the Nerdcast Empire. Until then, don't forget to join the Empire, the Nerdcast Empire.